Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming today. This is a faculty office hours session for the GLAM department. So that's Greek, Latin, and Ancient Mediterranean Studies. My name is Caitlin. I am an admission fellow here at Reed and also a recent alum. And I represent the territories of New York, Ohio, and Illinois. So this is just going to be a really nice, fun session to just kind of get to know a little bit more about the Greek, Latin, and Ancient Mediterranean Studies department, get to talk to some wonderful professors, learn about research that they've done, classes that they're currently teaching, and altogether just getting an idea of what exactly characterizes the Reed academic experience. So to kind of, to just start off, I was thinking maybe Tom and Nigel, you can briefly introduce yourselves and then give an overview of the program.
Sure. Should I introduce myself first, Nigel?
Go ahead.
So my name is Tom Landvatter. I am the archaeologist in the department. So my research is focused on archaeology of the Eastern Mediterranean, especially Egypt and Cyprus during kind of last centuries BCE, Alexander the Great onward. So like call it 300 BCE onward. That's what I'm focusing on. I've done a lot of field work in Egypt and Cyprus, and I run a field project on Cyprus where I bring Reed students each summer to get archaeological field training. I'm bringing 7 students again this year to go dig at a site near Larnaca where I'm working. And I teach courses, though across the curriculum, I teach archaeology courses in Greek, Roman, and Egyptian archaeology, as well as archaeology, death and burial. Plus I teach language courses too. I'm doing introductory ancient Greek this term, in addition to my archaeology stuff. So I'll let Nigel introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And maybe I can just underline what Tom was too modest to say, that for undergraduates to have substantial archaeological opportunities as undergraduates is very rare, right? Most schools that run digs are big schools and they have grad students, and grad students sort of hoover up the opportunities there. So my name is Nigel Nicholson, and there are 5 of us in the department. So Tom and me, and then Alice Hu, Ellen Millender, and Sonia Sabnis, who can't have too many of us on the call today, but there's 5 total. I'm one of the people who specializes really in literature. Particularly, I do poetry and poetry that was written for Greek athletes. So I study Greek athletics. I study the whole process through which athletics was memorialized and given meaning, particularly through these victory poems, but also through the statues that were produced and the other forms of memorialization. And I also do a fair amount of work in medicine and in the Greek West, Italy and Sicily, and all of those come together in various ways. As Tom said, we tend to, I'm not quite sure he said this, but we all teach across the curriculum. So I teach, language classes in Latin and Greek. I teach literature classes in Latin and Greek. I teach literature classes in translation. So, we have the literary people sort of focus on the literary classes. Tom and Ellen, the historical and archaeological people, focus on the history and archaeology classes, but we share up the language classes together. I've also, some of us also teach in the freshman humanities program, which you've probably heard about, Humanities 110. I'm teaching in that this year, and I'll be teaching it next year. That'll mean that I'll teach fewer classes in the department. Tom doesn't teach in Hum next year, and he'll teach more of those. But we rotate that around and mix up our classes.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, no, Tom, go ahead. What were you going to say?
So just I guess to kind of explain kind of our department, right? We have the GLAM department, so the Greek, Latin, Ancient Mediterranean Studies. And so we do have 2 tracks to the major, the actual program, as we saw, like we have people to teach language, literature, history, archaeology, and there are 2 tracks to the major to kind of encompass, kind of try to include everybody's interests. So we have on one hand a track that is Greek and Latin language and literature that's focused on Greek and Latin language and literature. So focusing more on language study, either Greek or Latin or both, but always getting at least a sample of both to an advanced level, as well as taking some history and archaeology. And then the other side is more focused on historical and archaeological evidence, where you have to take 2 archaeology, 2 history, and then can also do a bit more in either one, still with some language required, but less, only 3 semesters as opposed to going all the way to advanced. As well as getting more experience in either more in the department or in cognate disciplines like anthropology or art history. You can use courses for that to kind of depending on what you're interested in. And so we have a pretty decent kind of split in majors where it's between, I don't know if it's about like half and half at this point. Do the ham or HOM track, history and archaeology, the ancient Mediterranean. So lots of too many vowels. And then the Greek and Latin language and literature track. So we do have a pretty good split. But then we kind of encompass kind of like all through that, we kind of encompass like a large part of the ancient Mediterranean world, especially during what we call the sort of Greek and Roman kind of eras, starting 500 BC onward. We have a lot of good representation of all aspects of those cultures through that.
Yeah, so I put a link to the major requirements, but as Tom says, the big thing is we have these 2 different tracks. One is more history, archaeology, and one is more literature. And the great thing about GLAM, about the study of the ancient world, is it's a very big tent, right? We're not a department that's defined by discipline. We're defined by a place, and frankly, a lot of places, and a time, and it's a lot of times as well, right? So people end up writing their theses on a wide variety of places and times from a wide variety of disciplinary perspectives, right? Philosophical, historical, as well as literary, historical, and archaeological.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the thesis, really, we've been able to have students, because as you know, at Reed, everybody writes a thesis in their senior year. I've had a wide range of theses, and I've advised wide ranges of theses, from people who are writing on Virgil to people talking about conceptions of childhood and death and burial in Roman North Africa, to this year I'm advising a thesis that's comparing Roman Ostia to Teotihuacan in Central America. So like person who's really interested in archaeology and wants to do Mesoamerican stuff too, and so was doing a comparative thesis. And so we try to work outside, we routinely work outside our own kind of narrow expertise to try to like advise students, give them guidance, kind of let them do what they want to do with their theses. It's really an opportunity to kind of, I don't know, spend a year kind of doing what you want. And with the ancient Mediterranean, you really do have a kind of a wide, because it's like a place and a time rather than a discipline, you can do all sorts of stuff, mixtures of literature, archaeology, history, kind of all kind of mixed together in one place. So it's a very, very versatile.
Yeah. I think that's where, I imagine folks, you're looking at different places, right? And when you're looking at GLAM departments, ancient Mediterranean or classics departments, as they are in many places, you really want to sort of have a sense of kind of what classes are offered every year, right? We're lucky at Reed because we have a full-size department and we have a full roster of classes each year. So we offer Latin and Greek both sides, 3 years worth both years. We offer 4 translation classes each year. There's always going to be a lot of interesting stuff for you to do, and also the stuff you need to do to be ready for your thesis, right? We'll always have those classes, right? So when you come to thesis, you'll have the skills and knowledge base and so on that you need to kind of make good choices and do a good job with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I should say, like, it is important to note, like, what classes are actually offered. I think a lot of places, there's lots of things in the books that they kind of like don't necessarily get there, but we do every year offer intro, intermediate, and advanced Latin and Greek, and at least 1 history and at least 1 archaeology, and often two of those each year, plus potentially another translation course. Like I know next year I'm teaching both archaeology of the Greek world, so like the Greek Eastern Mediterranean, with a lot of Egypt and Near East in there, which I always, that's my bias, along with a course on the archaeology of death and burial. So generally, like a more thematic course next year, as well as teaching a bunch of Greek courses. I'm doing Intro Greek both semesters, plus a course on Herodotus, the fifth century historian, and focusing on Herodotus on Egypt, but because that's what I'm interested in. But Herodotus's take on Egypt, and we're reading that in the Greek and talking about the Greek encounter with Egypt through Herodotus and among other sources. So that's so. But those are the kinds of things that are offered every year. This year I did Roman archaeology, and I'm doing a course right now on the archaeology of Egypt and Nubia. So I'm trying to keep all those courses in rotation to make sure that everybody who's here over 4 years has a chance to take them if they want to.
Nice, that's wonderful. Thank you both for sharing a lot about the department and what you've kind of been up to recently. Would you both like to tell us a little bit more about your research and what you specialize in? I know you've touched on it briefly, but kind of getting more in depth about it, and also if students have ever gotten in on helping you with research or anything like that.
Sure. Nigel, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you what I'm doing right now. I'm working on a couple of books. One is a kind of an introduction to the poetry written on Greek athletics. So it's also an introduction to Greek athletics, because the idea being here that sort of what's really interesting about Greek athletics isn't so much the events and the festivals as the way in which it was converted into something that people with a lot of calls on their time thought was worth doing, right? So fundamentally, it becomes something with, political capital. And so I'm looking at how that took place, right? How essentially punching someone, for example, or jumping a long way, or running fast, or indeed, being a kid and running fast, right? Winning the youth races and so on. How these things come to be important reasons for you to be, or for your dad or whoever to be running the city, right? I often have students working with me in sort of two different ways. One is I will have students as research assistants, which means either kind of helping me proofread, edit, compile bibliography, so on and so on. Not a glamorous job, but I think it's an important one, and it's paid and so on. And then more interesting, sometimes I work with students on joint publications where, I'll ask students to write some number of the pages and so on. Over the years, I've done a couple of joint publications with students. And the other thing I have students do is help me prep classes. And that's a lot of fun, because I send, students off to sort of research a lot of stuff, do a lot of reading, tell me what they found was interesting, and then we sort of think about, what's going to work well together. All of that takes place in the summer.
So I've been my research originally was focused on archaeology of death and burial stuff. I was working in Egypt on mortuary practices there, and I've moved on now to working on Cyprus, which is an island in the Eastern Mediterranean, which working at a similar time period, 300s BCE, this early Hellenistic stuff. And I'm really interested in how Cyprus actually became a province of an Egyptian empire, the Ptolemaic Hellenistic Egyptian Empire, at this time. And I'm really interested in what that transition looked like. And so since 2018, I've been co-directing excavations at a site called Vigla, which is near the modern city of Larnaca, which overlooks the Larnaca Bay, the coast there, which is the site of a early Hellenistic fortified site or fortification, has some sort of military aspect, because we're finding weapons everywhere, lead sling bullets, arrowheads, iron daggers, knives, spearheads, evidence of weapons production. Things are happening there, which are quite interesting. And it seems to be occupied and then for a couple decades, and then it's abandoned very quickly, which isn't usual, and it's never reoccupied. It's just sort of like gone, which means that what we're finding is something that's very narrow window of occupation dating to this time when Cyprus was being fought over by a number of the successors of Alexander the Great. And so it's this really interesting window into this exact moment when Cyprus goes from being a bunch of independent city kingdoms and states to being just a province of another empire. And this site may have played a role in that. So I've been digging there every summer since 2018, pandemic aside, and bringing students there to participate in that research project, as well as get training in archaeological field methods. And so the students come and they work with me excavating we've been excavating a number of this kind of interesting complex of buildings towards the south side of the site. Not sure what exactly it is yet, but students have been work there, digging up material, sifting everything, washing all the pottery, helping sort the finds, photograph them, really participate and get experience in the process of archaeological data collection and interpretation. And so that's like the basic level. And then I've also, the past couple of years, have brought students back for a second season. I had one student who's a senior now. They came back and did a lot of work for us last year, doing a more kind of advanced kind of interpretive work. And they actually they ended up going through and sorting and weighing, counting, processing over 4,000 sherds of pottery. And then this turned into other finds from this one context, and actually did a poster presentation at a national conference based on that research. This summer, I'm bringing another student back again. They're going to be working with students from another institution, where I co-direct the project with someone at Metropolitan State University, Denver. And they'll be working with some students from Metro, and also excavating a square, doing some work on like inscribed material, also doing a poster presentation, and hopefully also a brief catalog of inscribed material to get a publication out. So this is something I try to use the field project as a way of getting students lots of experience in research, and as well as try to get some publications out of it. So I try to do that. And that all takes place during the summer, and during usually July, when it is exceptionally hot.
Tom, Reed is asking where the students live.
Oh yeah. So we don't stay with families on Cyprus. Going to Cyprus, like where we stay, it's frankly a little cushy for an archaeological dig, I think, in that we stay at the south of Larnaca, which is Cyprus is like a beach vacation island. It's like where everybody in Europe, Northern Europe, goes for their cheap beach vacations. So I always kind of describe it as like it's going to the it's kind of like the Jersey Shore of the Mediterranean. That's how I describe it. I'm from outside Philadelphia originally, so that's my point of reference. And it's like a vacation town, and we actually stay in Larnaca downtown. You're about a 5-minute walk from the beach. Because it's an island, the museum workspace closes at like 3 p.m. because they're just like, actually 2:30. It closes at 3, but they actually kick you out at 2:30 because it's like it's time to go home. So we can't do any work. We stay downtown. The students have lots of free time to go to the beach, wander around, kind of like do what they want in this kind of vacation town of like about 30 to 50,000 people. The site itself is actually on a British military base, which is an interesting experience in and of itself. And we drive up there. It's about a 15-minute drive away. But Cyprus is it's relatively easy, cushy, because you're in a city, you're not in tents in the middle of nowhere. It's very accessible. You can go eat at restaurants every night. It's like there's grocery stores, there's a beach. It's pretty nice, actually, there. So
maybe we should talk a bit more about study abroad in general, because there's a lot of ways to get some experience of the ancient Mediterranean on the ground, as it were. A lot of our students go to either Rome or Athens for one of their semesters in the junior year. We've got 2 programs that slot in very nicely, that students go to regularly. They're both taught in English and primarily, well, certainly the Rome one is all American students. I think the Athens one actually might be some students from elsewhere too. I'm not quite sure.
Maybe.
But both of them involve, the kinds of classes we teach here, as well as in-depth kind of field study classes where you go out and do a lot of field trips. We really recommend those. I think they're a great part of a GLAM major. That's what we call ourselves, Greek, Latin, and Ancient Mediterranean GLAM major. But we also understand, some folks going abroad doesn't fit with other things, right? Maybe you're in student government, whatever it might be. And we trialed this year, I think very successfully, a sort of 2-week study abroad program in January with a little bit of prep in the fall, a little bit of post-mortem, as it were, in the spring. And that was about, I think, 20 students, Tom, and I think it was a real win.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to continue with that every other year. And it's a great way to get abroad to, one of the kind of classical destinations. If you don't see yourself kind of working a semester in there. But in some ways, it's a great thing for folks who actually are more minors than majors. I think we make it very easy for folks to go abroad. It really works seamlessly with your major requirements. But for a lot of folks who kind of like what we do and maybe minor in Latin or minor in Greek or just take a lot of ancient civilization classes, it's a chance for them to go abroad to our kind of parts of the world and kind of just, literally touch some of these things, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I co-directed that study tour with Sonia Subnis, who is chair of the department this year and who's actually going to be in Rome next year, leading the one of the major study abroad program in Rome that we send students to, the Centro, the ICCS. And we brought, it was 2 weeks. This was a trial run, and I think we're definitely going to try to do it again. This is like this is the first formal study abroad class, faculty led at Reed that we did. And students for 2 weeks, mid-January, and we visited a lot. We did a ton in those 11, 12 days on the ground, and we got all over Rome, all the major museums, went out to Hadrian's Villa in Tivoli, went to Ostia, the ancient port of Rome. We were there on the ground at sites and museums, 6 to 8 hours a day sometimes. And we were just really, and the students had a really great time. And it was interesting because we had students there who hadn't been abroad before that did the program. They had a great experience. And that was going to be their study abroad time. And that was good. That's what I needed. Other ones are this is what I want to do. And then I think four of the students who are on that trip have now applied to various study abroad programs, including I think 2 or 3 are going to try to go to the Centro next year. That is, be in Rome again. They couldn't get enough of Rome. Oh, I see a question here. Yes, about other places to study abroad. Yes, we do. So normally most of our students go to either CYA, College Year in Athens, or the Centro in Rome, because it just sort of most naturally fits. And then all the courses just sub in and we're yep, that counts for majors. It's fine. Either way. But we do have students who have gone to other places. There is a standing program at Oxford, I think, that we send students to.
Yeah. These are full year programs.
Full year programs. There's also one at was it University College
Dublin, Ireland.
And
Cork and Trinity College Dublin. There's one at Nottingham in England. We've sent students to Paris as well for a year, though you need French for that.
Well, I have a student. Actually, there is a student. One of the students who went to Rome, I believe, is actually going to Paris next year for study abroad for a semester rather than Rome, but it's going to go to Paris. So the options are there, and the study abroad. We have our relative, I guess he's been here 2 years now, but our new quote unquote study abroad director, Alberto Del Rio Malo, has been very on top of kind of getting organizing study abroad, getting revitalizing programs and getting students where they want to be. And it's something that wherever you go, I'm always hoping at some point, stability being, depending on still to have students go back to the American University in Cairo, which for me would be, I would love to have students be able to go back there. I know we also have, I think a program at not Boğaziçi, Boğaziçi University in Turkey, in Istanbul, which would also fit nicely in, but also be outside the normal like classical like Athens, Rome kind of like remit. But you can also use wherever you go, right, as a base to go travel around and like take advantage of that. I think that's also really important to like, you go abroad, even if you're in Rome or Athens, like use that time to go travel and see as many. I'm an archaeologist, so I'm like, you must go see places in person to really understand them. So I'm like, go, here's a list, hit that up and use your time there to go really see as many things as possible. So I think it's exceptionally valuable.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing about those experiences. That sounds really amazing. We did get another question in the chat about how does the Greek use of agora compared to the structure of classes at Reed, and what are the similarities between them?
I can take that one, but I just noticed we've got one more on the study abroad. So you can certainly spend a semester abroad in different years. It just takes more planning.
Yeah. I think most people do junior year or have done a whole year junior year, but there are a number of students who have done sophomore as well. It's possible.
I would say the main that is some of the programs don't offer the introductory year of language, though that's increasingly rare now, but it used to be more common. So it made more sense to go away when you were further up the kind of language food chain. But yeah, I mean, you know, we want to make that work, and we've got good programs to work with. But maybe I can go back to that other question. So the question was about, in a sense, you know, what are the classes like at Reed, right? And whether that's like an Agora, right? An Agora is a kind of a marketplace, and all sorts of things going on in Agora, right? Both kinds of respectable things and deeply unrespectable things, and a lot of stuff in the middle, right? It's a trading space, it's a market space. Stereotypically, according to the sort of comic playwrights, it's a place where there's a lot of swearing and abuse and bad language. But also, more interestingly, it's a place where, you know, a lot of people from different cities, cultures, worlds intersect, right? Traders come in there, sell their stuff. And so in some ways, right, Agora's become a kind of a way of thinking about a sort of form of interaction. Like I say, I'd think about it perhaps a little more historically as a more complicated form of interaction than maybe it's become typed as. But, you know, in our conferences, we really like them to be discussion based. So in the kind of language class, you know, is you know, a little more obviously a kind of, there are things for you to do and we set them up and you need to do them. But once we get into the discussion classes, the literature classes, the history classes, and so on, fundamentally, we give you stuff to read and think about, and then we spend the class time talking about that, right? Sort of working through what you thought about and using that time to really kind of firm up, you know, what the people we gave you to read, what they're thinking about, what's right with it, what's wrong with it, what you can use, you know, and then working through your own kind of take on these people. So I think for us, discussion is really, really central, right? I mean, this old saw about, you know, if you go to a lecture, you'll remember like 5%. If you go to a conference, if you do it in a seminar, you'll remember about half, right? That's still not all of it, but it's a whole lot more than lecture. And then the third piece of this is if you ever teach it yourself, you'll remember it all. And we do actually have students kind of tutoring each other. And so that's kind of the third piece there. And of course, your thesis, right, is this kind of independent project where you're doing the kind of the organization and the independent work there, right? So that's where the circle closes for everybody.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing about that. Tom, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I guess it's I'm thinking about like with archaeology, it's also kind of it's kind of like a mix for me, right? So there's a lot of like stuff to like there's a lot of stuff to look at. It's about both learning like your combination. I try to do a combination of like learning basic material, like places, like objects, classes of stuff, like things that you should. I just told all of my Egypt students, it was like, you need to come out of this class knowing what a Shabti is. Like, I will not, that you must know what a new Shabti is. But also like within that kind of reading articles to try to like understand how people are interpreting that material and like what you can actually do with the archaeology. My goal isn't to say like, let us memorize like the following 15, like, Kuroi statues. But rather to think about like, okay, here's like, you need to know these basic things, but then like, what are the arguments you can make using that material? Like, how do you answer questions about cultural change, interaction, social structures and stuff using material culture? That's the kind of thing I'm interested in. And I try to get people like both a combination of like lecturing about things, discussing stuff in class, like looking and like picking apart like figurative decoration of things, but then also discussing articles to kind of pick that out. So it's kind of a mix there to kind of show like what are the possibilities of what you can do with archaeology. I try to do that in every class.
Very cool. There was a mention earlier about senior theses, and I was wondering, are there any especially interesting projects that you're helping to advise right now, or are there any from the past that particularly stand out to you?
I mean, definitely. I think thesis is, as Tom alluded to, I think is one of the sort of great pleasures of teaching at Reed, right? Because all students do a thesis, right? And this is very unusual, right? At most schools, you might get to do a thesis, but most people don't, right? So part of what makes thesis work in most places is that it's a kind of restricted good. But we want everyone, and we have everyone do a thesis, and so you just get a sort of vast amount of different kinds of things. This year, one of my thesis students is doing a comparative study of a Roman text, Ovid's Art of Love, which is a kind of, at least a kind of a mock handbook on how to go about falling in love, right? Which is obviously a sort of not the kind of thing we think is amenable to a handbook format, right? But it becomes a very important work. And so she's doing a comparison of this with a kind of a medieval version from the 11th century by a man called Andreas the Chaplain, also in Latin, which is on normally called On Courtly Love, right? But it's a series of sort of rules of how to love. It's much more perhaps class conscious than the Ovid text, which is much more perhaps overtly centered around defending or maintaining a certain kind of masculinity. But in many ways, the two are very similar, right? They're both about kind of shoring up a certain kind of status, which in context is damaged, right? It's damaged in Ovid's time by the fact that Rome has moved from a kind of oligarchy where authority was at least traded around and unstable to one where one person's won all the marbles and is not going to give them up, right? And everyone else feels like they're not really part of the competition anymore. And in the 11th century, what's happened is this shift towards primogeniture, where suddenly estates, instead of being divided up among the kids, are just being entailed to the oldest son. And so there's a lot of folks who are facing a very different adult life to their youth, right? And kind of what that looks like and what sort of status they'll have and how they'll go about perhaps trying to maintain their status is very interesting. So that's Ariel, she's working on that. I have a student who's just started this term. She's doing a spring fall. She is working on different kinds of sort of family killing in Greek tragedy, which is a great topic, right? A sort of a really central theme of tragedy, and we'll see where that goes. In the last few years, I've had students work on Ovid, on Virgil and Homer, on Plato's dialogues. I'm trying to think of the sort of, we've maybe Tom can talk more. I think we've had, on the kind of more unusual side, we've had a lot of sort of cultural preservation ones, particularly things like digital reconstruction's been an issue. Back in the day, we had a bunch of Byzantinist ones, which I think students like doing, because back in those days we didn't actually have any classes on Byzantium, and now actually there are some in the religion department. But they would pick, strange, sort of slightly magical Byzantine figures and see what they could find about them. And we have a lot of classics religion theses that are between the two, saints' lives or pagan rituals, whatever it might be. Yeah, I don't know, Tom, a few of yours maybe.
Yeah. I mean, the one I'm advising this year, Anna, she's been working on this sort of comparison between, especially interested in how ethnic identity is manifested through material culture in Ostia in Rome, and then Teotihuacan in central Mexico, which are actually close to, like, they're not that far off in terms of date, actually, like, right, they're actually pretty contemporary, talking like, second, third century CE in both places, both large cities. Ostia just happens to be a really well-preserved urban settlement from the High Roman Empire. We don't have as much, like, in terms of like the urban fabric of Rome, because it's, occupied by 2 million people, as opposed to, and then Teotihuacan, which we have the city of several 100,000 people that from central Mexico. And she's been interested in doing this to think about, because she's really interested in Mesoamerican archaeology, but then thinking about, like, well, what does this kind of comparative look do? And she's been looking at different, like, the way that both, like, theoretically, how do you approach ethnicity in archaeology, which is a very tricky thing to do, thinking about ethnic identity through material culture. And she's also been working on then after that, thinking about domestic context, so households, and then also in mortuary practices and death and burial. And what's interesting is, like, I think we'll get to, she's just finishing it up and she's kind of working through kind of conclusions and stuff to think about, well, in one place, like, you have like Teotihuacan, like, everything is built by these wonderfully planned apartment buildings that are like super uniform, built by the government, built by the state. And there's a sort of, but there seem to be these like ethnic barrios where people are kind of kept, like, there's like the people from this region are here, people from this region are here. And there seems to be some like evidence of that in domestic stuff. Whereas in the Roman side of things, privately, the thing you do actually is, like, a lot of these are like apartment buildings too, which they're building. You wanting to appear as Roman as possible in your private life. You want to kind of assimilate to high culture Roman values, but then in certain public spaces, like geographic, at least, diversity is like emphasized. Like, there's this famous, the Piazza della Corporazione in Ostia, where you have all the merchants get together to like sell stuff, and they all have these little mosaics indicating where precisely they're from. Like, if you're from North Africa, like from Egypt, they have like the lighthouse and the Nile. If you're from dealing in stuff from like Arabia, you have elephants and stuff. There's a sort of like public display of diversity there, but privately you just want to be a fancy Roman. So it's an interesting kind of contrast in the way things are done there. So I found that particularly intriguing. And yeah, as Nigel said, we've had someone do something on antiquities law. Actually, that was like a couple of years ago. I had someone talk about like cases of repatriation, looking at a number of objects that were looted, that were in modern U.S. museums, and how they were returned. Talking about especially this like fascinating case of these tablets from Persepolis that are held by the University of Chicago, that are technically property of the Iranian government. And then Iran got sued in this terrorism case, and then the property was seized to pay like a settlement. But then the university said, no, you can't do that because of these important tablets, and they're actually in trust for us. Like, it's some really interesting, complicated stuff in like modern sort of applications of like, well, what is this, like, sort of these politics of antiquity as it relates to material objects. It was really quite interesting. So yeah.
No, that all sounds really interesting. Wow. I'm gonna need to go to the thesis tower and check out some of those, read them.
Yeah, maybe I
Awesome.
can stress, one of the nice things about our department is we have plenty of students, but the seniors, right, majors, we have maybe 6, 7, or 8 a year. And so you get plenty of attention from your thesis advisor, and we pretty much let you, devise your topic on your own, right? We're going to help you kind of shape a topic that is doable in the year. But we have the kind of bandwidth to kind of work with you on, where your interests are going.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Do you have an idea of what students typically do after they graduate from Reed?
Yeah, typically, it's hard to say. A fair chunk do go into education. Going into grad school now is less common. I think there's just fewer jobs in the field. But a lot of our students who want to teach go into teaching, teaching high school. But equally, a lot of our students are going into higher ed in other ways, things like admissions, actually. People find that, I think we try to help people think through, what is it you want to do, right? If you want to be part of an educational institution, is it that you want to do research? Is it that you want to teach? Is it that you like a kind of a college community, right? And people have different answers there in different ways. So increasingly, we're seeing alums in kind of college administration, the staff side. We have a lot of alums in law, in business, the odd alum in accounting. Um, uh, uh, yeah, I guess those, the marketing is common. We got some in video game production, particularly around the sort of classical video games. But it's a wide range of stuff, right? I mean, I think what classics does is it sort of trains you, classics as a field in general, trains you well, right? Trains you to write, trains you to think, trains you to interpret. And in your time in college, right, you want to sort of think through sort of what field you want to end up in, what interests you, and we'll help you sort of find internships and shadows and so on, and sort of think through, what really interests you and what do you enjoy about what you're doing, and how can you kind of find that in a career that will pay the bills.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like one of the benefits of like a major in GLAM is really that like you're being taught to like how you're kind of forced to think across a wide variety of not just you're not just dealing with text, right? You have to deal with text, you have to deal with objects, you have to deal with art, you have to deal with historical sources, documents, literary text. You're sort of forced to engage with a wide variety of like types of things to make your arguments. And you're also dealing with like scraps of things, right? It's like everything is so fragmentary. And you have to like learn how to like work with kind of like minimal bits of information, how to properly kind of think and extrapolate from those like little things. So it really kind of gives you a good grounding in kind of working with almost like any kind of like media, I guess, like working, like thinking through things visually as well as textually. Like you're able to like do that and to really kind of understand like how to make arguments from like what kind of good information is, like how to construct arguments from like little bits. So it really kind of prepares you actually to do a lot of different things, not just be like, not, I mean, it gives you kind of generally, of course, like an appreciation and understanding of kind of like a significant part of the human past, which has like a lasting kind of impact and influence on present societies, which is useful and important. But it also gives you this command of like these certain kind of sets of skills that I think are really quite useful and can be broadly applicable. I think that's something that students often come into college saying like, if I major in this, that means I'm going to get a job in this. And I don't think that's necessarily that's the way you should think about it, right? It's like you're thinking about like you think about like the skills and the kind of things you're learning along the way, and then you could do that. And some people do go into grad school. We've had students who go into grad school in classics or art history and have gone on that way and have been successful, and others have gone a completely different path. working in, like public, like especially my first thesis student has been working in education, but like on the public schools in like Baltimore, and really interested in education policy, and that's where their drive and ambition was. And so you can go any way you really want. It's been yeah, there's
Yeah, I
a
mean, to be concrete, like my last 4 thesis students, one is in law school, one is in grad school, actually in political science, but classical political science, interestingly. One is in library school, library science, right? She's going to be a librarian. And who am I missing? 1, 2, law school. Come to me in a sec. I've got to count on my thesis students. The other one is in graduate school in sort of medieval and Nordic. She is in graduate school in Iceland and Oslo right now.
And I know one student who is graduating this year has already got a Fulbright lined up to teach, right, in France.
France.
In France. Yeah.
That's awesome. Wow, so good to hear about all of those different opportunities that they've come across, and the benefits of an interdisciplinary education overall. Having that diverse kind of skill set is really nice. We have about 10 minutes left over. So if anyone wants to drop more questions in the chat, this would definitely be the time to do so. But a question that I think would be nice to kind of talk about is there anything in particular that your department does to build community and kind of support each other?
Yeah, loads of things, really. I think it's something we've really sort of thought hard about post-COVID for obvious reasons. So let's see, Tom, fill me in when I sort of get things wrong. But in just in the next sort of 2-3 weeks, we've got some more formal things, like we have a symposium where the thesis students present their theses and everybody comes and we have biscuits and or cookies and so on. We have an informal pizza evening where we take the students out for a pizza. We do that twice a term, and whoever wants to come, who's sort of, a major or a minor or takes a lot of GLAM classes, usually 20-25 people come. That's fun. We just, socialize there. We will have a softball team in the sort of end of year celebrations. That'll be fun. We'll have an end of term party for kind of, and Sonia always does a sort of Jeopardy quiz, which ranges from stuff that's actually about our field to stuff that's not about our field and maybe about us, and so on. And there are sort of ridiculous door prizes and so on for everybody. We also have an undergraduate conference coming up in a couple of weeks. That's on a Saturday. So the unit is the Northwest. We're hosting it this year. 3 of our students giving papers, and then there are 7 students coming from other universities in the area, and people will just come and support, as it were. It's always fun. That's a little more on the sort of academic side, but we try to have a nice range of things that are sort of, more serious and less serious, more academic and more just kind of kicking around.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything I missed there. I mean, so I do run. I also, I don't know how much community this is. I'm also president of the local Archaeological Institute of America Society.
Oh, yeah.
So I bring in, there's a national lecture that's sent to us each year. And I recruit other kind of local people to kind of give lectures on an archaeological topic, some Mediterranean, some not, but I try to have those. We have those, 3 to 4 times a year to have a lecture that brings people together on archaeological topics. Yeah, so I do that as well. Did you mention the lounge that we have, the student lounge?
Oh, no, I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have in the ETC, which is where my office is, there is a joint GLAM and religion student lounge that is accessible to students at all hours to use and like hang out, use as a study space or whatever, that's restricted to GLAM and religion students. So that's also available there. Yeah. And you mentioned the pizza nights. Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned the pizza nights. I mean, I just think, we try to be really sort of around for our students, right? Students drop in. We really try to be good advisors and just kind of available. A couple of questions just came up. I don't know if this is quite the question, but I think it's the answer. I mentioned that in my research, I do Greek athletics. And when I teach Greek athletics, for me, part of the point is to understand how that worked as an institution back in the day. But a big piece for me is how to understand how sports work as an institution now, right? It's a massive part of the modern economy, modern culture. And so one of the things we do is we go on little field trips, right? We go see soccer teams play, or we go to Portland Roller Derby, which is very funny. Or we watch some sports programming and think about how that packaging is done. And I really find that I sort of think through, and I love sports. I love, it's a big part of my life, less now that I'm older, but now I just watch a lot, which is fantastic. But I really think through sports, even as I just sort of enjoy them. I think through them sort of in the ways in which I think through Greek athletics, right? I think through them politically and socially. I think through them from these different angles, as well as from this kind of heritage angle that Tom's talking about, right? So how does the Olympics get to be the Olympics today? How did that happen? What's changed? What's maintained? Where did this idea of, say, a sort of, amateur sportsmanship come from, right? It was not a Greek ideal, right? So really kind of thinking through that history. And so it becomes a whole sort of reception history as well as a kind of knowledge of the deep past. It's a knowledge of the deep past and, however it was packaged, reused and reframed up until now. And so, yeah, I mean, if the question, which I think it was, right, how does stuff sort of really kick back into your kind of the way you move through the world now? For me, it's really important. And I would even say that's true, at the end of the day, what I do is I read poems, right? And to me, that's a question of really understanding the work that words do, right? Words shape the world around us. They build the world around us. And I find that's what I take with me. I love words, but I'm also, I admire and am suspicious of words, right? And as a teacher, I'm sort of quite demanding about my students' use of language. But I'm also demanding of the use of language of those around me and myself. And I think hard about, the discourse that's out there. And I hope that my students come out of my classes with the same kind of demands on the world.
Yeah, I think that it's like thinking about me, and I'm thinking about like this idea of like interaction on like the way like one thing that I have my research itself like focuses on has been consistently on like interaction among all these different groups of people in the Mediterranean, and consistently being surprised, and I don't know why I'm surprised anymore, but like the degree to which people in the past like moved and like interacted with one another in ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect from perhaps like your just general kind of layperson's understanding of like ancient history or how the world worked, right? Even the question there, it's like there's Greeks, there's Romans, there's Egyptians. We have this idea of like discrete bounded little entities, which isn't really also how the world, it really isn't like how that world worked, right? I mean, this is I always show my students in Greek 111, I have a day talking about like what's the furthest extent of like Greek? Where does it go, right? Like what the language, right? And showing these examples of like, well, here's Greek inscriptions in Kandahar, Afghanistan, written by the Greek king, the Indian king Ashoka Maurya, proclaiming his spread of Buddhism, but in Greek, because that's who's there at that time, because of Alexander the Great. And there's these interactions that go there. Or in the 3rd century CE, Ezana stone in Ethiopia, where you have this Ethiopian king of Aksum describing himself as the son of Ares. And the next one, he converts to Christianity, and he really then he's like, well, I'm Christian now. Like, there's no more son of Ares business. But this use of Greek, right, sort of as this like language, and the way it spreads and the way people have used it to communicate across this massive space is always consistently like forced me to reconsider like the degree to which we have created these like we have artificially created these sort of like bounded spaces that are like these kind of like, here's this little I don't know, like sort of like what exactly is Greek in Greece is sort of like often conceived as sort of very kind of narrowly of like the modern nation state. And it's not like what exactly is Greek culture and Greek language. Its spread is so much more in the ancient world. I just went to a seminar last week on a recent find in the site of Berenike in the east coast of Egypt on the Red Sea coast of a Buddha sculpture that was found there from the 2nd century, dated to the 2nd century CE, though I have questions maybe on that dating, maybe a little bit later, I think. But it's of the Buddha, for sure, in Egypt during the Roman Empire, made out of marble from the area around Istanbul, so carved locally. So someone is carving statues of the Buddha locally in Egypt for that. So it's, again, this constant like challenging of assumptions about the kinds of connections that were possible, the way people moved, the boundaries of the ancient world, how fluid all of that was. That's like that's informed my research, which has informed my teaching, which has then informed my own perspectives on kind of like the broad scope of human history. And so I think that's something that I have always been pushing is like to my students is like the world was not a series of tiny little boxes of kind of bounded like ethnocultural units as you might think. It's like it is far more complicated than that. And I think that's a very kind of valuable like lesson that comes out of any study of the ancient world for thinking about the modern world as well.
Wonderful. That's awesome. And actually takes us pretty much right to the end of our time. So that's perfect. Thank you, Tom and Nigel, for both being here today and allowing us to take up your time and talk more about the Greek, Latin, and Ancient Mediterranean Studies Department. If anyone is interested in, reviewing this session again, it will be posted to our Read YouTube channel. So definitely head over there in the future if you would like to rewatch this. And if you would like more information about any academic departments, you can always email questions to admission@read.edu. We also have a student email address if you want to write to any current students who might be majoring in a specific department. That is writeaready@read.edu. Tom and Nigel, thank you so much again. And is there anywhere you would direct people who are interested in learning more about GLAM?
I put some links to the departmental website. There's a lot of fun stuff there, particularly when you get into the sort of the individual profile pages where people talk about their teaching and their research and their this and that, and you can get a really sort of round idea, I think, of who people are and what they do. We've got a lot of years of experience between us, and you can get a good sense of that there. I think there's also theses listed up there somewhere, though. But there's a lot of fun stuff on the page.
Wonderful. Well, yes, thank you both so much once again. Thank you everyone who was in attendance today. Definitely direct any questions that you have to the admission inbox, if any arise. And we hope to see you at future faculty office hours. Thank you everyone and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.